So what Mayor Emanuel did in 2011 was, after he privatized the Skyway, he took about $1 million in proceeds from that transaction and established the Chicago Microlending Institute. And he tapped 3 core lenders, chief among them being Axiom, because they have the most experience. And they really are a global network, right? So they operate in South America, Central America. We've got some activity in Africa. And they fell, bumped their head, got back up, and found out how to do it right in the continental United States. And so Axiom was kind of tabbed as the lead lender. Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, which is a group that I was affiliated with prior to my association with Chatham Business Association, and the Women's Business Development Center. And each one of those groups was given $300,000, which was a portion of the proceeds from the sale of the Chicago Skyway. And again, it comes back to this notion of starting with free money, right? So it's a free $300,000 that the organization get. Each one of those organizations has a particular demographic that they're targeting, and there's a particular mission need that they have. So, you know, as we kind of revisit the idea of buzzwords, low income, minority communities, and women, particularly over the last decade, have really been where philanthropists and altruists have kind of contributed their dollars, right? And that's actually something that kind of harkens to the true essence of microlending, because a lot of global and international microlending funds have an express purpose of lending exclusively to women, because they find that women pay the debt back much more quickly, and they're willing to accept smaller loan amounts, right? In the United States, the idea was to lend to low-income communities, be they Hispanic, Eastern European, African American, and so the city was kind of carved up. So the Women's Business Development Center dealt exclusively with women, kind of within that central ring just outside of the loop. Axiom Chicago did the North and West Side, Eastern European and Hispanic communities, and Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, in conjunction with Chatham Business Association, dealt with African American communities on the South and West Sides. And so what we found, based on that initial contribution, was that the loans that were made in African American communities on the South and West Sides represented the most sustainable loans, quickest repayment history. And so recently, organizations that were active in those communities have been recapitalized, right? So they gave C&I $300,000 up front. The city came back and gave them another $400,000 to continue their activity in the second year. And they also were just awarded about $750,000 from the SBA to continue that activity. I think that you know, it's very easy to kind of get lost down the wormhole in discussing microloans. So briefly, I'll kind of discuss what you would need in order to apply for a microloan. And if there are any questions or concerns afterwards, you know, I'll be available here for a conversation. But, you know, primarily you're going to need to package the same documentation and information that you would if you were going to a traditional lender. So that's 2 years tax returns, 2 years or 3 months bank statements, a profit and loss statement year to date, proof of income and things like that. But it's also important to understand that while a micro lender isn't necessarily focused on your credit score, they are very interested in the last 12 months of your repayment history on your credit. So you could very well have a 500 credit score and get approved for $10,000. What you can't do is have a 630 credit score and have your bills over the last 3 months start languishing or falling by the wayside. Because what they're looking for is immediate repayment. Microloans aren't term debt. Oh, they are term debt, they're not lines of credit. So it's not like somebody will give you $10,000, you borrow $3,000, you pay down $2,500, and you got $9,500 left of credit available. Microloans, the juice starts as soon as the check is cut to you. And then you're responsible for repaying that debt 30 to 45 days after origination. Generally, there are no prepayment penalties. One of the things that I want to express to you, though, is that microlending in the United States has kind of gotten away from the initial spirit with which it was created, in that interest rates are so much higher now, right? So when banks lend to people, they kind of base it off of 2 pretty consistent rates. So that's LIBOR, which is like a London interest rate that the federal, that international banks use, or they use prime. right, which is published in the Wall Street Journal. And, you know, they kind of fudge a few points under prime, a few points above prime, depending on what the financial market is. Right now, microlending rates average anywhere between 11 to 16%, right? And banks aren't lending at that rate. Banks tend to lend right now, I think, anywhere between 6 to 8%. However, microloans have kind of been able to get away from, you know, from that black eye because their amortizations are variable, right? So there's no set amount of time that they say you can only borrow this money for 2 years, you can only borrow this money for 3 years. Generally, they can amortize those loans up to about 60 months. So you end up managing your payment through the amortization. And in actuality, the difference between a $25,000 loan at 6% over 3 years and a $25,000 loan at 11% over 3 years, you know, it's probably a $60 a month in your payment. But the way you manage that debt is by extending the amount of time that you pay it over. Again, this is probably something that I can get lost and we can be here until about 3 o'clock today having this conversation. But I do appreciate everybody's time. I've left some information here on the table that you guys are welcome to come and peruse. I've also got some business cards, and I'd love to have any further conversations that anyone may be interested in. Thank you so much for your time.